Welcome to Automating Excel with Python. In today's lesson, I will teach you how to create a spreadsheet using OpenPyXL, as well as adding data to your spreadsheet. Let's talk about everything else that we'll learn. So obviously we're going to learn the creating the spreadsheet because I just mentioned that. We'll write data to the spreadsheet. We'll add and remove sheets. We'll insert and delete rows and columns, edit cell data, create merged cells, as well as learning how to fold rows and columns programmatically. Let's start by creating a spreadsheet. Creating Excel spreadsheets using Python allows you to generate a new type of report that your users will use. For example, you might receive your data from a client in the form of JSON or XML. These data formats are not something that most accountants or business people are used to reading. As you know, most people would probably learn to work with Microsoft Excel or documents of that sort. So, if you're a programmer and you get data in other formats like JSON or XML, or even perhaps a PDF, knowing how to convert those file types into something that the business people can use can be quite valuable. So let's find out how to create a spreadsheet. Here we import the workbook object. We need to pass in the path of the location that we want to save our new workbook. Once you've got that, you can just say workbook equals workbook. Note that I'm using a capital W here to instantiate the workbook object. Once I've created a workbook object, I can then save it off to the path that I passed in. In this case, we're going to pass in hello.xlsx. This will create an empty workbook. Let's run this code and then let's go try it out. So here we have a hello document. If we open this up in Excel, we should see an empty worksheet, which we do. So we've just created a single worksheet. Note that we didn't specify the sheet name. So Excel by default will just name it sheet, and you'll end up with just an empty worksheet. Not real interesting, but that's probably the simplest code you could write to create a new spreadsheet with Python. So let's add some data to the spreadsheet and make it a little bit more interesting. To add data, you just specify which cells you want to add data to. In this case, we're going to add data to column A, row 1, column A, row 2, and column A, row 3. And we're just going to put in hello from OpenPyXL and then save it off to our hello document once again. So let's run that and let's jump back over here and reopen our document. So now you can see, if I zoom in a little bit, that we now have hello from OpenPyXL here. Pretty sweet, nice way to create a little document. And it just uses all the default font stuff that you would expect to use if you were typing into Excel directly yourself. However, we just overwrote the previous example. You need to be careful when you use OpenPyXL because it won't warn you that this file already exists. It'll just overwrite it. So just keep that in mind. You might want to add some code to your file that says, hey, does this file already exist? If so, you might show a warning to the user and say, hey, there's already data here. Let's not overwrite it. Anyway, you can use the techniques that I just taught in the previous example to write data to any cell in your spreadsheet, which is super nice. So let's go ahead and add rows of data instead of just single cells. So if you want to add a row of data, one of the good ways to do it, or one of the best ways that I've found, is to create a list of lists. And inside that list of lists, you can have numbers or strings, or even a mix of the two that you want to insert into your spreadsheet. So here we create our workbook object. We grab the active sheet, which in this case will just be whatever the first sheet is. And then we are going to loop over my list of lists. And then for each row of data, we're going to append it. And then we're going to save it off. So let's run this code, and now we should have a right rows file. Let's jump over here and see what's in it. So let's zoom in a little bit, just a little bit, zoom in. And you can see that when you do a list of lists, for each item in the list, it goes into its own cell. So 1, 2, 3, A, B, C, 44, 55, and 66 are all inserted into separate columns and cells. And what's nice about this is that you can have a lot of data inserted this way. In fact, this would be a really quick and dirty way to convert like a CSV file to an Excel file using Python. Just something to think about. So let's talk about adding and removing worksheets. Adding a worksheet to a workbook happens automatically when you create a new workbook. The worksheet will be named Sheet by default, which you've already seen. If you want, you can set that name of the sheet yourself. So we're going to do that. Creating the sheet title, and we'll talk about removing them shortly. But for now, here we're going to create a sheet title. So we're going to grab the current sheet, just like we've been doing, and then we can set the sheet title to hello. And then let's add another sheet. So here we're going to add a new sheet, and we're going to say, we're going to use the create sheet function here. I believe it's actually called a method. So workbook.method, and then we're going to pass in a title called world, and then we're going to save it. So let's run this code, and then we're going to go open up Hello Sheets and see if we have two empty sheets called Hello and World. Let's see, we need to close this one. Hello Sheets. So if you look down here, you can see we have a Hello sheet and a World sheet. So that worked exactly like it should. Let's close this off so we don't accidentally open that again. All right, so the create sheet method has a couple of parameters. The title, which we just used to add the title to the worksheet, and the index, which is where to insert the worksheet from left to right, beginning at 0. So here is one example that kind of violates the rule I was mentioning in another video tutorial about Excel not always being, or Excel being 1-based rather than 0-based. In this particular case, OpenPyXL does use 0 as the starting number for where to insert a sheet from left to right. So let's go back before I go to the delete section here. And we will take and just mess with this a little bit. Let's say we want to put index equal to 0 here. And so now when we run this code, it'll insert the worksheet or world before hello. So let's just jump back over here or reopen this file. And you can see that world now appears before hello. So that's how you could insert a sheet at the very beginning of your workbook and control that kind of stuff. So keep that in mind. You can do that with however you like. All right, so now let's talk about deleting a worksheet, because maybe I inserted that and I don't want it where I inserted it because I realized I made a mistake. So here we're going to create a worksheet like we've been doing. As you know, when you first create this, it's going to create a sheet. When you call create sheet, it's going to create a second sheet. So now there should be two worksheets in there, and we're going to print it off just to prove that there are two. Then we're going to insert a worksheet called second sheet, even though by calling this a second time there should be 3, and we'll print off the number, the different sheet names again, and then we're going to delete that one that we just created, second sheet, and then we're going to print out the sheet names and just kind of see, you know, what we end up with. We should have the 2 first ones still in there, and second sheet should be deleted. So let's run this code. So you can see sheet and sheet 1. So when you call create sheet and you don't specify a title or an index, it just adds a number to the sheet name to keep them straight. So sheet and sheet 1. Awesome. Then we add second sheet. Note that we set the index to 1. So that inserts second sheet into the second place because it's 0 based, 0, 1, 2. And then, of course, we use the del keyword from Python to delete the second sheet back out of the workbook. And you can see that it's no longer in the list. And so then when we save it into our del sheets file, it no longer appears. And of course, if you jump over here and actually open it up, you can see that there is only sheet in sheet 1, and there is no second sheet worksheet because we removed it. So if you need to remove a worksheet, use the del keyword and use the dictionary type syntax to remove it. Let's talk about inserting and deleting rows and columns. The OpenPyXL package provides you with several different methods that you can use to insert or delete rows and columns. What we're going to learn about is how to insert rows, insert columns, and delete columns. And you'll note that all of these are just methods that you can use on the workbook object. Each of these methods can take the following two arguments. IDX, which is the index to insert into. I don't know why they didn't just call this index like they did with the create sheet method. I think that would have been more consistent. But they called it IDX, so make sure you use that name instead of index. And then you have amount, the number of rows or columns that you want to add or delete. All right, let's insert some columns and rows. So here's an insert demo. We're going to create our sheet or our workbook and then grab the active sheet. We'll add a little bit of data. And then we're going to insert a column before A. So sheet.insert columns starting at index 1. Note that when you're inserting columns, it is again 1 based. Isn't that interesting that the sheets are 0 based, but the columns are not? So just watch out for that. That's kind of a gotcha right there. Insert the column at the beginning, and then we're going to insert 2 rows starting on the second row. So index 2, amount 2. That means that we're going to insert 2 rows in the second row, and then we're going to save it. So let's do that, and then we're going to go look at inserting.xlsx and see what kind of data we have in there. All right, so let's make this bigger so we can kind of see what we're doing. And then we'll just grab our code. Here we go. And you can see when we created this, we had hello from OpenPyXL, and it would have been in A1, A2, and A3 like we have here in the code. But then we decided to insert the column starting in index 1. And so that shifted our text over into B, column B. But then we decided to also insert 2 new rows starting at index 2. So starting at index 2, which is row 2, we insert 2 blank rows, 2 and 3, which separates the hello from the from and OpenPyXL. You can play around with that and just try out different numbers and different amounts in your indexes and whatnot, and just see how it all works. But that gives you kind of an intuitive way of how to format your text and how to insert rows and columns with Python. So let's learn about deleting columns and rows, because sometimes you just need to do that. So here we're going to have A1, B1, C1, A2, A3, and A4. We're just going to add some data to those. Note that this time, because we're using A, B, and C, hello from OpenPyXL will be along the top through A, B, and C columns rather than from top to bottom. It'll be from left to right. And then row 2, row 3, and row 4 will contain just strings. But that would only happen if we didn't have any deleting going on. So we're going to do some deleting. Delete column A. So we're going to call delete columns with an index of 1. So that will delete the hello, row 2, row 3, and row 4 because there will no longer be a column A anymore. Then we're going to delete 2 rows starting on the second row, and then we're going to save it. So let's run this in order to see how messed up our worksheet ends up being. Nope, I didn't want del sheets. We wanted deleting this one. I can click the right one. We'll get there eventually. All right. So we have deleting now. You can see that when you remove column A, it doesn't actually delete column A from the worksheet. It deletes whatever is in column A and shifts everything to the left. So from and OpenPyXL, which used to be in columns B and C, have shifted over to the left. Rows 2, 3, and 4, which used to be in column A, were removed along with hello because they were all in column A originally. And it's because we basically did this and went and did delete. That's how you would do it in Excel. We did that programmatically, so it just removes everything. To kind of demonstrate what's going on here, let's do that. Let's put in a delete. And you can see that OpenPyXL gets shifted over to the left because we deleted A. But you can also see that A comes back. So all it really does is just shift data to the left when you do that. All right, so yeah, play around with that if you'd like to. This is just a good example of how you can delete columns and rows with Python. What if you need to edit the cell data? You can use OpenPyXL to do that. It can change values in a pre-existing Excel spreadsheet. So here we're going to edit the inserting file that we had before. So let's go ahead and open that up so we can see what's going to happen. Let's go grab inserting. Before we run this file, I want you all to see what's happening here. So you can see that in the inserting Excel document, we have hello in column B1, and then we have from OpenPyXL in B4 and B5. Okay, keep that in mind. Now we're going to run the code, which will load the workbook, inserting, grab the right sheet, and then for cell and the data that we're passing in. So here we're passing in a dictionary of cells and values that we want to edit. So we're going to grab the current value of the cell before we change it. So sheet cell, so we're going to grab B1's current value, and then we're going to change it to high, and then we're just going to print out what we're doing here. So let's do this. So we're going to change B1 from hello to high and OpenPyXL to Python, and that should have saved the data to our inserting file. So if we jump back over here and reopen the Excel document, you can see that it has been changed. Pretty cool. So that's how you go about changing values in an Excel document using Python and OpenPyXL. Basically, the main key here is that you need to know ahead of time which cells you want to change, and then you can just pass them in by the cell's name, B1 or C1 or whatever it is, and then pass in the new value that you want it to be replaced with. All right, let's say we want to create a merge cell. A merge cell is where you have two or more cells merged into one. To set a merged cell's value, you have to use the top leftmost cell. So if you want to merge A2 to E2, you would set the value of the cell A2 to get to have a value show up across the merged cells because it is the top left cell. So let's take a look. We're going to create our workbook. We're going to call merge cells, which is a method on our workbook object. Then we're going to grab the top left cell, which is A2. And we're going to set its alignment, which is really nice. So if you want to set alignment, you need to import alignment from openpyxl.styles. And here we're going to center it. So we're going to center the alignment both horizontally and vertically. And then we're going to set A2 to whatever the value is that we passed in. And then we're going to save it. So here we're going to have a merged Excel file. Let's check it out. Okay. So as you can see, we have this cell here, which is A through E2, and all these cells are merged. And the way this works is that you can't really see it in Excel, but because we set the value hello world to A2, you end up seeing it here. If I set it to one of the other cells, it probably wouldn't show up correctly. In fact, I think it would be empty. I think it would be blank if you don't set it to the first top left cell, the cells that you're merging. So just keep that in mind. It'd be kind of fun to rerun this. Let's see. Let's rerun this and say we want to go to E3. Then you can see how it's centered vertically as well as horizontally, because you really couldn't see that in this example. So let's rerun this. And we'll reopen this. And now, if you zoom in, you can see that Hello World is centered both top to bottom, which is vertically, as well as horizontally. You really couldn't see that as well in the previous example because it was only one row wide. So anyway, nice way to mess with it. You can set the alignment of cells easily in OpenPyXL, and we'll look at this more in a future tutorial. But that kind of gives you a quick peek at the future. So OpenPyXL has lots of different ways to style cells. In this example, I only showed it alignment, but if you want to check out the many other features that OpenPyXL has for setting styles in cells, you want to check the openpyxl.styles module. I will be covering this more in a future video, though. Like I said, you'll learn more about it later. All right. So I also want to learn about folding rows and columns. The term folding is also called hiding or creating an outline. The rows or columns that get folded can be unfolded or expanded to make them visible again. You've probably seen this used by professors, or your coworkers might do this as well. So here, let's take a look at an example. We're going to create a workbook. We'll pass in some rows and columns that we want to fold, and we're going to set hidden to true. So we'll grab our sheet. If we pass in any rows, we'll grab the beginning row and ending row. So that's rows 1 and 5. And then we're going to do sheet.rowDimensions.group. Begin row, end row, and we're going to set hidden to true because that's the default here. And then we're going to also do that with some columns. So C through F will also be hidden in this particular case. So we should see rows 1 through 5 are hidden and columns C through F are hidden if we did this right. Let's go find out if I did. So now we have a folded document. And you can see Excel has done a nice handy thing and kind of shown you that these are hidden. So look here, you can see that the rows start at row 6. So that means rows 1 through 5 are hidden. And you can see you have A, B, and G. Well, where happened to C through F? Well, we just told Python to hide those, as you may recall. We told it to hide C through F and 1 through 5. Unfortunately, Excel actually makes that pretty obvious because it puts this little green bar for the hidden items. And if you click on the little plus sign, you can expand it and see that those are hidden. And you'll see that Excel also makes it easy to rehide it again in both locations. So that is how you would create basically hidden rows or hidden columns, also known as folded rows or folded columns, using Python and Excel. And because I clicked on those plus and minus signs, it thinks I did some changes to the file. So we'll go ahead and save that. All right. Let's also talk about freezing panes. You've probably heard of this before, but maybe you didn't know what it was called. Freezing panes has nothing to do with being cold, but it has to do with freezing a row in your Excel spreadsheet that you don't want to scroll. So you might do this if you have like a bunch of headers along the top of your Excel spreadsheet. You want those headers to always be visible when you're scrolling through the data. That's called freezing a row, which I actually explain here in this text. So anyway, let's look at the example. It's a little bit more convoluted than anything else we've done so far, mainly because I had to add some data. All right, so here we have some headers, name, address, date, and zip. Yeah, we should probably start at the top. So let's create the workbook, create the sheet. We'll give the sheet a title. We'll call it freeze. Then we're going to call or set the freeze panes attribute to the row to freeze. In this case, we're going to freeze A2. Then we're going to have some headers. We're going to slap those into the sheet. And then we're going to use some Python magic to create some rows of data. And then we'll loop through and set that data and save it off. So if we run this code, you should see some magicalness happen that allows us to freeze the pane. So let's go take a look. Let's grab our freeze file. And let's zoom in a little bit so it's easier to read. So I don't know if you can see this, but I can totally see it. This line here is a little bit different than all the lines following it. It is a little bit more bold, and that kind of gives you a hint that it might be frozen. Let's try to scroll this file and see what happens. So here I am scrolling away, and you can see that row 1 is frozen. It's called a freezed pane. And the way that we did that, if we go back and review our code, is that we just set the freeze panes attribute to whichever row we want to freeze. In this case, we said A2, which basically just says freeze this row. Now I froze it at A2. You'd think what I'd be doing is freezing it at A1, but you actually freeze you start the freeze at the row beneath the one that you want to freeze. It's a little bit weird, I agree. In my mind, it should be A1 is the one that we want to freeze, but we're actually saying we want everything above A2 to be frozen. So keep that in mind when you're trying to do this yourself. All right. So wrapping up, you've learned that you can use OpenPyXL not only to create an Excel spreadsheet, but to modify a pre-existing one. So we learned how to create them, write data to a spreadsheet, add and remove the sheets themselves, insert and delete rows and columns, edit cell data, create merge cells and freeze panes, and we also learned a little bit about setting the alignment style. I hope you found this video helpful, and I hope to see you the next time.